Many thanks, everyone, for joining us for today's press conference. The COP President will now make some opening remarks.
Thank you very much, and welcome everyone to Gender, Science and Innovation Day. We know that women and girls are disproportionately impacted by climate change, and we cannot allow equality to be a casualty of climate. But women and girls are also leading efforts to tackle climate change in communities around the world. And in the words of Brianna Ferran, they are not drowning, but fighting. And we must support those efforts. We must enable the full and meaningful participation of women and girls in climate action. So I'm very pleased to say that countries and other stakeholders have made announcements today to make climate action gender responsive. I'm also very pleased to report that yesterday, countries collectively pledged in excess of $232 million to the Adaptation Fund, which will support countries to deal with the impact of a changing climate. Gender and inclusivity run throughout our COP program, including Science and Innovation Day. And I've always said that it is vital that we follow the facts and allow science to light the way. I'm going to turn now to the negotiations. I am encouraged by countries' commitments to anchor science at the heart of the cover decision. Yesterday, my lead negotiator, Archie Young, convened heads of delegations on the elements of the cover decision that we proposed in our non-paper. And as I announced at the informal stock-taking plenary yesterday, I have requested pairings of ministers to support the presidency in some of the key outstanding issues on which we need to reach agreement. These pairs started their work yesterday and are consulting with a wide group of ministers and negotiators. And then we convened yesterday. The time has now come to find political consensus on the areas of divergence, and we have only a few days left. New texts were also tabled on issues including common timeframes, transparency, finance, and adaptation. We are making progress at COP26, but we still have a mountain to climb over the next few days. And what has been collectively committed to goes some way, but certainly not all the way, to keeping 1.5 within reach. The gap in ambition has narrowed. Now the world needs confidence that we will shift immediately into implementation, that the pledges made here will be delivered, and that the policies and investment will swiftly follow. We have an opportunity to succeed. The transition to a resilient zero-carbon economy is technologically possible, it is economically attractive, and it is accelerating everywhere. And if we successfully manage this, we will deliver immense benefits for the world. Building on existing mechanisms, transparency and accountability must be at the heart of these commitments. So overnight, the presidency will publish the first draft of the cover decision. It will likely require negotiating teams to consult their leaders and capitals. We have an urgency to our negotiations, so I ask ministers and negotiators to carry out those consultations expeditiously. I'll pass you now back to Lynn Davidson.
And now Salka, I think, our head of cross-cutting issues, will now make some opening remarks.
Thank you. As the COP president said, women and girls often face the brunt of the effects of climate change, and despite studies showing that they have done the least to cause it, this is an injustice and we must turn it on its head. And research shows that empowering equality through climate solutions improves the outcomes, and women and girls should be seen as leaders and not victims. And that is why we've hosted Gender Day today to call for action. And we've seen some inspiring leadership, and we're seeing momentum. Countries and other stakeholders have set out bold new steps to ensure climate action is gender responsive and to improve women's leadership and meaningful participation in climate action across the globe. And we want countries to be guided by frameworks such as the Gender Action Plan and UN Women's Feminist for Action for Climate Justice, and lead actions on a local, national, and global level. And just to finally end, addressing equality in the climate nexus means that you link up policies, plans, and finance so that climate change and gender equality are addressed hand in hand. Thank you.
Thank you, Solka. We'll now take questions from the floor. Can I ask, we've got a couple of standing microphones, but if you can try not to touch them for COVID reasons. Gentleman in the second row here, please.
Thank you. Roger Harrabin from the BBC. Nice to meet you at last, Lynn, instead of on the telephone. This is for Mr. Sharma. You will be aware of the report coming up any minute now from Climate Action Tracker saying that even if all the carbon cutting pledges made by nations at Glasgow are taken into account, emissions in 2030 will still be around twice as high as necessary for the 1.5 limit. Could you comment on that, please?
Thank you, Roger. Well, obviously, as you've just said, the report is not yet out. But what I can say to you is that there have been, obviously, a number of reports that have come out over the last few days, and I suspect there will be further reports that come out. What I think they will all be demonstrating is that there has been some progress, but clearly not enough. And as I've said previously at these press conferences, if we look at where we were heading before Paris, the trajectory, I think, on some of the analysis that's out there suggests that we were heading to 6 degrees of global warming. Post-Paris, those commitments were taking us to below 4 degrees. And now I think you see various reports which suggest we've bent the curve towards 2 degrees. But of course, that isn't good enough. What we've always said is that we want at this COP to be able to say with credibility that we're keeping 1.5 alive, 1.5 within reach, and that is what we're going to be working towards over the coming days.
Lady in the front row.
Hi, thank you, Amy Cassidy for CNN. There's reports that you're struggling to get a number of countries or governments, including the US and several car manufacturers, to agree to a pledge to make all new cars and vans zero emission by 2040. Is this something that is a big concern for you? Thank you.
You'll forgive me if I don't give a sort of a running commentary on discussions that we're having. I know you will understand that. We have set out our views on where we would like countries to be given if they are a big car market, or if they're an emerging car market. The UK itself has led the way here. We set out last year that we would ensure that from 2030 there were no more sale of new petrol and diesel cars. We'll see where we get to in terms of this pledge. We obviously have Transport Day coming up, and then very happy to have a discussion around that on the basis of who's signed up to the pledge.
Lady in the third row, right here.
Thais Gadealara from Redacción, Argentina. Many actors mentioned that the presidency is pressing to leave this COP with the regulation of Article 6, but they are concerned that this could lead to a bad and weak regulation of the article, so I would like to respond on that. And also I would like to know if during the work of this week, the number of participants, of observers, has been increased in the room of the negotiations. Thank you.
Great. Well, look, I mean, I think on Article 6, along with all the other rulebook issues we're trying to close off, again, we've been very clear right from the start of when we took on the COP26 role, is that we would like, at COP26, to reach agreement on all the outstanding issues on Article 6. I'll ask Archie if he wants to comment in any more detail, but you'll appreciate, right now we're in the middle of sort of quite complex discussions. There will be texts that will emerge, obviously, on these issues, which everyone will be able to have a look at and comment on. On the issue of access to rooms, I can ask the UNFCCC if they want to comment on this specifically, but what we have said is that we're working very hard to ensure that room access is available for observers, but I fully acknowledge that there are constraints in terms of the number of people that can be in a room, and I think everyone understands The reason for that is because we are still unfortunately facing COVID, and thankfully we're in a position where on that respect at least, not being complacent, but in terms of COVID, the incidence of that has been extremely low. But I don't know whether the UNFCCC wants to comment at all.
Just to support the points that Mr. Sharma has made, we realize that space is extremely limited due to COVID restrictions and security restrictions. We have made every effort to provide access to civil society. We have also really pushed the digital platform where observers, civil society, and others can watch the proceedings. We are reevaluating this week to see how we can provide additional space for civil society. Thank you.
Gentlemen, sorry.
Why don't you pick up on that?
Thank you. Just to add on Article 6 and also on observers. So on Article 6, I mean, the article itself on cooperative approaches and non-market approaches is clear that it is to enable higher ambition, and also it specifically references environmental integrity. And so in our discussions with all parties, we are encouraging that across this, but across all issues, we do not go for the lowest common denominator, but we continue to strive for results that will be consistent with the level of ambition that you are seeing across all other parts of our work. On observers, just one example, I hope, of the way that we are trying to respond to the concerns that have been expressed. So yesterday morning, as many of you will have seen in the plenary, several observers expressly requested to be allowed to participate in the discussions on the cover decisions. That was originally a closed meeting, but at the start of that meeting, I asked parties, in fact, I urged them to enable participation from observers, and I was very pleased that they agreed to that. As a result, observers were able to participate, and we heard statement at the end. So thank you.
Thanks, Archie. Gentleman on this side. Here.
Thanks very much. Tom Clark from Sky News. Just following up from Roger's question, we are going to find out, I think around now, the emissions gap report and the CAT report shows we are way off course. Can you tell us in concrete terms what has to happen in the next few days to make sure this isn't the summit where 1.5 dies? Yeah, so I think when these reports are published, I think they look at what it says in terms of NDCs, the 2030 NDCs, and what trajectory that is taking us to. And what I think the science has said is that we need to be we need to reduce emissions by 45% by 2030. I think these reports also talk about where we are if all the commitments that have been made, including the net zero commitments, the long-term strategies, if all those have been where we are. And obviously, that suggests we've bent the curve further. However, we are, of course, very clearly focused on ensuring that we are keeping 1.5 within reach. So all of this is going to be obviously worked out through consensus. But what you will have heard in the stocktake plenary that took place on Monday was the call from a number of the groups for us to see whether that 2030 ambition needs to be revisited in the next couple of years. Now, ultimately, where we get to is going to emerge through consensus. We'll have the cover decision going out overnight, and I'm sure there'll be questions on that as well during the press conference tomorrow. I'm sorry, I didn't hear that. Well, I think you'll have to wait to see what it says, and we're very happy, both Archie and I, to come back and discuss the contents of the cover decision tomorrow.
Gentleman in the second row here.
James Murray from Business Green. The other area of contention that was reported this morning was around issues of transparency. Can you give any overview on where the talks are at with that topic of transparency and reporting? And also, do you still have hopes that we are going to finish on time on Friday?
I see some of you smiling, even giggling at that idea. Look, I've been very clear that we have to have urgency in these talks. And we just need to keep pushing forward on this. And I genuinely think this is all hands on deck. I know that the negotiators have been working literally night and day on this. There is a sense of urgency, and yes, I would very much like us to finish at the time that has been set out. I'm sorry, you had an earlier question?
Transparency.
Oh, on transparency, yes. Well, do you want to take this one? Go on.
Thank you. As many of you know, one of the core negotiating items is the enhanced transparency framework, which is crucial to give the confidence that the commitments that have been made will be delivered. Overnight, as the COP president said, negotiators were working late, and this morning new texts have been uploaded, so I'd encourage you to have a look at those. Through the course of the discussions, there have been three main areas where convergence is really needed. The first is on how to operationalize the flexibilities and how to interpret the flexibilities that were set out at COP24 in the Katowice package. The second is around the structure and format and inputs to the structured summary, which is the way by which the progress on NDCs will be tracked, the nationally determined contributions. And the third issue is around support for transparency, as in the support that will be made available to enable countries with less capacity to really fulfill their reporting requirements. Those appear to be the three issues that negotiators are really working on. And as the COP president said, two ministers, Minister Shaw from New Zealand and Minister Joseph from Antigua and Barbuda, are working with parties and their ministers in order to help find resolution. Thank you.
I should take someone. A gentleman in the second row here.
Muir Dickey of the Financial Times. Without looking for a blow-by-blow account of the negotiations, do you think it's fair, the reports, that it has been Saudi Arabia, Brazil and Australia that have been standing in the way of increased transparency? And you sounded a little bit unsure about the deadline on Friday, or a little bit more unsure about the deadline on Friday. What is the hard deadline? What is the latest possible that we could continue to have negotiations? Thank you.
Well, firstly, in terms of the deadline, I'm sorry if I sounded uncertain. I most certainly am not. The deadline that we have set out, that we want parties to work to, is 6 p.m. on Friday. In terms of individual countries, again, you'll forgive me, what I'm not going to do is to give a running commentary. These are, as you will all know from your great experience, these are very sensitive negotiations. And what we are trying to do here is to build consensus, not try and find division. What I would say is that I think certainly during this last week, there has been a constructive spirit amongst negotiators. And obviously, I am having meetings as well with ministers, with groups, and I hope that that will produce a result that we want.
Gentleman in the black suits and the black mask, just here.
Thank you. Francisco Camacho, The Daily Times. I realize you're probably quite limited in your ability to comment on the upcoming cover decision draft, but I was wondering if you could give us an idea of areas or sectors, if you will, where we can expect big change, or at least just whether you feel this is a very appropriate first draft, whether you feel optimistic about it.
Well, why don't we get the first draft out overnight, and like I say, we're very happy tomorrow to go through and take any questions that you may have. And I'm sorry, it was probably pretty frustrating for you, but the drafts are being obviously worked on, so we will get them out overnight.
Lady right at the back in the centre.
Hi, Carolyn Beeler from the public radio show The World in the US. This might be another cover decision question you don't want to answer, but what are the conversations around coming back to the table to update NDCs that are happening? What are the timeframes that are in question?
Well, again, I think let's see what the cover decision comes up with, but for variation of voice tone, Archie, is there anything you want to add?
I would just add that you saw the bullets that we put out in our non-paper, and we held a meeting yesterday with all parties where we heard very constructive views, inevitably on a number of points on that, but on others. We heard divergent views as to what parties expect, and we continue to work with them. We've said all along that we want these decisions to be co-created, that we want them to really reflect the collective spirit here in Glasgow. So we will continue on that basis, but we will also continue to push for results that can really stand up to scrutiny and stand up to the ambitions that we have set. Yeah. Thank you.
May I just add one point on this? I hope you will have noticed what I said in the opening remarks when I said that we think that this first draft will likely require negotiating teams to consult their leaders and capitals. So I hope that gives you a sense. Additionally as well, what we will want is for those consultations to happen quickly so we can continue and move to the next discussion on the text.
Gentleman in the centre with the blue sweater and then the gentleman behind.
Good afternoon. Kevin Keane is my name. I'm coming from an Irish NGO by the name of Antashka and reporting back to the Irish Environmental Network. I wanted to get your views, Mr. Sharma, in relation to the report yesterday by Global Witness, which has made clear that there are at least 503 fossil fuel lobbyists present at the COP this year, representing over 100 fossil fuel companies. The fossil fuel lobbyists outnumber the official indigenous constituency by over 2 to 1, and their delegation is larger than the combination of the delegations of the 8 most affected countries of climate change, those being Puerto Rico, Myanmar, Haiti, the Philippines, Mozambique, the Bahamas, Bangladesh and Pakistan. Meanwhile, yesterday it came to light that it would appear that the draft text for the 26th year in a row fails to make any reference whatsoever to the need to reduce and phase out fossil fuels in order to combat climate change. You know, you speak about keeping 1.5 alive. I would have thought that the phase out of fossil fuels might be an obvious first place to look. So it's not credible to suggest that the overwhelming number of fossil fuel lobbyists that are here in the conference is unrelated to the failure to include fossil fuels in the draft text and in the output of this COP. So I wonder, do you deny that they have had an outsized influence on these negotiations? Do you think it's appropriate that over 500 fossil fuel lobbyists are here at the invitation of the COP and the UNFCCC? And if you don't think that they've had an outsized influence at these negotiations, can you explain the failure to include any reference to the phase out of fossil fuels in the draft text agreement? Thank you.
Thank you. Well, look, I think first thing to say is that the attendance of parties and observer organizations and who they accredit as delegates is up to them. That is not something for the UK presidency. It's absolutely clear on that. And ultimately, accreditation is a matter for the UNFCCC. And I think this was raised in a question yesterday, where I think Patricia Espinosa also spoke about this. And I think, Chai, if you want to come in on this issue, please do. The other thing I would just say to you is that in terms of the non-paper not including any reference to fossil fuels, I mean, ultimately, it's a summary of the issues that have been highlighted by all the parties, right? So this is not a sort of a UK view that we have put forward. The non-paper was a reflection of what we had heard from all parties. Again, I go back to the point, we're here trying to build a consensus. And so the non-paper reflected all of those key issues, and it was extensive, all of the key issues that had been raised by parties with us. Maybe what we can do is, Joe, if you want to just pick up on the point about who gets to come here, and then if Archie, you want to say anything about the non-paper? If you want to, sorry.
Okay. So maybe just to reiterate the point, I think our Executive Secretary, Ms. Patricia Espinosa, spoke to this yesterday. We work with parties. Parties are free to accredit all parts of civil society, government, industry. We do not check that. It's an inclusive process to get everybody to the table. Thanks.
A gentleman behind Kevin who had his hand up.
Hello, Felix van Geyer, newaurator.com. There's something you said, Mr. Sharma, that you think that negotiators are going to have to liaise with their superiors, whether back home, their leaders. It would indicate to me that the paper you're putting out tomorrow could be perhaps quite an ambitious one to try and get to a consensus around that. Are you in a position to manage our expectations a little bit? And Archie, I'm wondering, in the hierarchy of issues, if we can actually put them in a hierarchy, because they're all very important, are there any divergences which are greater than others?